Tribal Director for the Shuswap Nation Tribal Council. We are co-hosting this event with Thompson Rivers University, and we're very happy to have the opportunity to present these renowned speakers and help everyone learn about the doctrine that has shaped most of our lives.
Okay, so just to tell our visitors a little bit about our nation. We're 17 bands in the Secwepemc Nation. At one time, we were 32 bands, or 32 different campfires within our nation before contact. So we've managed to have many challenges before us, and we're still here today. And our population is near about 10,000 Secwepemc in and around the territory. Like most BC, no treaties exist in Secwepemc. Title to our traditional territory has never been ceded, surrendered, or extinguished in any way. On behalf of our Secwepemc Chiefs of SNTC, we are proud to be co-hosting this Doctrine of Discovery Conference with Thompson Rivers University, and very honored to be here today. Through education and dialogue on this important matter, the Doctrine of Discovery, we believe that by coming together as strong people and nations, we will work towards our goal of ensuring that this doctrine is never again recognized as a legal construct justifying the continual denial of our Indigenous rights and laws, title, and sovereignty.
Chapter 1, Walter Echohawk. Presentation topic, Johnson versus McIntosh and the Doctrine of Discovery in the United States. Impacts upon federal Indian law and the future of the doctrine under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Was colonialism legal? Yes, it was legal according to the law of the colonizing powers. The law of colonialism, which came to us by early international law. It supported this colonialism effort and made it perfectly legal, attempted to justify and legitimize acts of colonialism throughout the world. And so the purpose of the law of colonialism in international law was basically threefold. First, and I hope that some of our other speakers will talk about this further, but it governed the relationship among the nations of Europe as they went out on the international plane to colonize the world. Secondly, it set forth the rules for colonizing non-European nations through doctrines of discovery, notions of plenary power, guardianship, Christianization ideas, notions of race and culture. But these rules and this body of law were not accountable to indigenous peoples. It acted as a tool to strip them of their rights. And contained no protections for indigenous peoples at all during the lengthy history of international law, this body of international law, up until a couple recent decades ago. But the third purpose of this body of international law was to basically to justify and legitimize acts of colonialism on the part of European nations. The attributes of this body of law, especially the special attributes that relate to indigenous peoples, we can see that first and foremost in the subject of this conference, this doctrine of discovery, doctrines of conquest, the just war doctrine, the use of violence or military force against indigenous peoples, notions of trusteeship, guardianship principles, notions of racism, notions of plenary power. These are all integral components of the law of colonialism. And it was this body of law in various forms was embraced in each and every colony around the world.
Chapter 2, Robert Miller. Presentation topic, The International Law, Doctrine of Discovery.
The court holds. The United States was settled on this idea of discovery and conquest. Now, it's interesting that the word conquest is used at all. In this 30-page opinion, it's in about 5 paragraphs. These tribes had not been conquered in war by the United States, the tribes at issue in the Johnson v. McIntosh case. Where did conquest come from? Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. What did this do to Indian tribes? If this country was allegedly settled, and of course it's talking the United States, on discovery, well, tribes immediately, the court holds, lost some of their property rights to their land. Now, you've seen the paintings of Christopher Columbus and all these other explorers that came to the New World. What'd they do? Stick their flag and stick their cross in the soil. And, well, that's what did that do? Well, legally, it did a lot under the international law, Doctrine of Discovery. Now, what a joke. But when I give these talks, I always pick someone on the front row. So I'm going to come to your house tonight with the Bob Miller flag and the Bob Miller cross. Why are you laughing, sir? It's the international law doctrine of Bob Miller. And I'm going to claim her land. Okay, so we laughed. What's the number for 911? Do you have a gun in your house? Okay, she's going to handle it because I must be a little off my rocker to think that somehow my religion's superior to hers, my nationality is superior to her, my gender is superior to her. Well, you know I'm an American too, so. What are you guys laughing about? Okay, so you get my point. It's humorous, but this is what international law was, and this is what this did to American Indian tribes and to the First Nations here. Again, I'm not going to say much about Canadian law, but American Indian tribes to this day own only the limited title to their land. The United States is the legal owner of Indian lands in the U.S. The tribal entity is the beneficial owner. Indian nations of the United States cannot sell, they cannot lease, they cannot develop their own land, which is 56 million acres of land in the lower 48 states. They cannot sell, lease, or develop their land without the permission and a signature from the Secretary of Interior. Now, I am certain that it's the same here in Canada. I don't know who has to sign off, your DIA or something, but the reserves here, the lands owned by your First Nations, are impacted by that identical idea.
Chapter 3, Louise Mandel. Presentation topic, The Chilcotin Case and the Doctrine of Discovery.
World. Every fortnight around the world, an elder dies with an ancient tongue taken to the spirit world forever, a language dead, the sum total of the ideas and dreams, misbeliefs, thoughts that are encoded in that language. All that intellectual wealth is lost to humanity, and our collective suffering has become an economic disease where worldwide structures around the world are crumbling. You know, Gandhi said about the Western society, he said that it's not in its right mind. He said, separated from God, we're separated from love. Separated from love, we're separated from ourselves. Separated from ourselves, we're insane. Where there is no love, there's fear. Where there is fear, there's a life-gripping force that can crush the soul. So here we are. I'm a lawyer. I've been trained in the adversarial system, but I'd like to suggest that while we have some battles to fight in court, this isn't where we're going to win our next moment. This isn't where transformation is going to happen. I thought of that great scene in Batman and Joker where Joker's got Batman down and he's got a knife to his throat. And Batman says, well, kill me then, Joker. And Joker says, why would I do that, Batman? You complete me. And that's a bit what it feels like in court, that as you resist something, it becomes stronger. And I'm going to suggest that you can change things not by fighting the existing reality, but building a new model that makes the old model absolute. And we've already got a beautiful new model built. It's Indigenous laws which are the laws of the universe. It's interesting, I was at a conference in Australia where a lot of Indigenous people were talking about Indigenous laws, and it just sounded like music to my ears, because it's all the same laws that your elders talk about. The earth still holds those laws, and Indigenous people's stories still carry those laws, and it's those laws which hold the transformative possibility, because they carry a different thought structure than the thought structure which is denying it.
Chapter 4, Jeanette Armstrong. Presentation topic, The Subjugation of Indigenous Governance, the Salishan Interareal Construct.
We need to revive and strengthen our anti-doctrine strategies. We can't go on thinking somehow the courts are going to be more lenient, or the courts are going to open their doors in different ways if we just do this or do that. I really believe that our strategy has to be to exercise and assert what fundamentally was ours prior to Confederation, pre-Confederation, pre-Doctrine of Discovery, and rejuvenate those things, because in British Columbia, in Salishan territory, we have not relinquished that right in any way, shape, or form. So here's some what-if questions that I leave you with. What if the 25 Salishan language groups work together legally to revive and rejuvenate its trade and political capacity and exercise jurisdictions in a de facto legal strategy? In other words, instead of asking them, is this right or wrong, asking the courts, just acting on it, knowing what is right, understanding what is right, and acting on it, and having them then say, hey, wait a minute, and then they have to prove that we aren't right, like the Jules and Wilson case, which is, one of those kinds of strategies in which our chief said, no, we don't have to ask them. We'll just do it, and we'll hand out those things ourselves. So instead of falling in line with the concepts of being a discovered people and the government's process of land claiming through its framework of Doctrine of Discovery law process, in which they're eroding everything into postage stamps and less if they can, and the divide and conquer tactics in the treaty process, the so-called treaty process, using the diminishment of power tactic in which each local autonomy is the only construct of their recognition. So that divide and conquer is being used in saying, oh, you're a First Nation Penticton Indian band. Well, what about the Syilx, the whole of the Syilx as a nation? What about the whole of the Secwepemc as a nation, right? And that joint use, overlaid and multi-use of all of our territories. Well, we're sorting that out in the Okanagan between our communities. We're starting to understand this principle and assert it in our way.
Chapter 5, Stephen Newcomb. Presentation topic, Our Original Free and Independent Existence as Nations and Peoples.
Particular terms such as occupatio. Occupatio is the principle of occupation. So effective occupation is the idea that an invasive force comes in and it actually asserts occupation to that enemy territory. Occupancy, on the other hand, is a term that John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, used in the Johnson v. McIntosh decision to make a distinction between a native right of occupancy and the claimed right of occupation by the colonizing power. It's important, by the way, to look closely at the word Aboriginal. When people are discussing Aboriginal title, what does that come from? Well, it actually is an adjective. The word Aboriginal is an adjective of the word Aborigine. An Aborigine is a single person. And when you look up that definition, it says a native inhabitant of a particular place as distinguished from an invading, colonizing population. So the larger context of the word Aboriginal is the invading and colonizing population. And so the Aboriginal title is the title as distinguished from the invading or the claim title of the invading colonizing society. But more than that, it's the actual title that's assigned by the invading colonizing society to the original peoples. And I'll leave you with this thought. When they claim that they have extinguished an Aboriginal title of occupancy, all they have extinguished is something that they constructed out of their own minds. In other words, they created a mental projection of what they said was true of our nations and peoples, and then they said they extinguished that. Well, all they did was extinguish their own idea. So it doesn't mean anything. We have thousands and thousands of years of original, free, and independent existence with our ceremonies and our spirituality and our cultures and so forth, and that it means everything compared to their pretensions, a term that Chief Justice John Marshall used. A pretension is simply something that's pretended, like claiming that you've created sovereignty by waving a sword in the air and creating a notarized document. So.
Chapter 6, Ronald A. Presentation topic, Doctrine of Discovery, a Policy of Racial Subjugation and Genocide.
They were soon disappointed by their guests and asked themselves, what have we got for our good faith and friendliness? They treat us as subjects without any agreement and force their laws on us without our consent. They say that the Indians know nothing and own nothing. They treat us as less than children and allow us no say in anything. They enforce their laws one way for the rich white man, another way for the poor white man, and yet another for the Indian. This is how our guests have treated us, the brothers we received hospitably in our house. Because of this, my chiefs of 1910 said, "We condemn the policy of the government towards the Indian tribes of this country as utterly unjust, shameful, and blundering in every way. We denounce as being the main cause of the unsatisfactory condition of Indian affairs in this country and the animosity and friction with the whites." To all of you here, I ask that you embrace this condemnation of government policy as unjust, shameful, and blundering in every way, and demand that the governments do the right thing. Even then our fight is not with the ordinary citizen who came here in good faith. Our fight is with the government. However, you and the ordinary citizens have a duty to see that the government does the right thing, for something at this time retards those governments from doing the right thing. In summary, and contrary to the doctrine of discovery, from Coyote we have our values and principles. Embrace respect, abide by reciprocal relations, and recognize their importance. Live by and with the knowledge of the environment and ecological and social relations among species. Have and abide by laws of conduct with each other and between nations. So from this day forward, let us pledge that no one's knowledge ought to stand in the shadow of another's. Thank you.
Chapter 7, Tanya Frichner. Presentation topic, The Impact on Indigenous Peoples of North America from the International Legal Construct known as the Doctrine of Discovery, and consequently the leadership of Indigenous peoples in the development of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
We have Indigenous peoples now have several different human rights mechanisms within the UN system that you should know about. The first one that came to be was in 1982, called the Working Group on Indigenous Populations. What that came from was a gathering of North, Central, and South America Indigenous peoples in Geneva to talk about the discrimination against Indigenous peoples in this hemisphere. leaders. There were like 156 different leaders. The Haudenosaunee sent a delegation of about 40-plus leaders. And it was also at that time that our people traveled on our passports that were issued by our nation. So the whole lot of our folks went to Geneva, Switzerland with a document that the international community and the United States had never seen before. But they stood by their guns, they did it. It was an arduous process, but they were allowed into the country of Switzerland using those passports for the first time. And I share that with you because today we seem to talk about indigenous sovereignty so freely. It just sort of flows off our lips. Sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. But what is it? And how does it apply to indigenous nations? What we learned, and I'm giving a Haudenosaunee perspective, is that sovereignty is an action. It's an act. You either are sovereign or you're not. You either act sovereign or you don't. It's a very clear action, and one of those actions was to travel to this international United Nations conference with our own passports. That was the action, that we would go to Geneva as sovereign nations and talk about our government, our rights, and our traditional ways in partnership as equals. Not in somebody else's court that makes you feel less than. Where you're.
Chapter 8, Oren Lyons. Presentation topic, Challenges we face today as Indigenous nations and challenges we face today as the human species.
And things and how human beings are human beings. In today's times when we are facing major systemic change in the whole system of the universe as far as we're concerned. We're a small part of the universe, but it's changing here. And it's a systemic change. It's a change that you're not going to fix. You're not going to fix it. How are you going to fix it? Carried it to the point where you can't fix it. You might be able to modify it a little bit. You might be able to if you all get together, if we all get together, and that's the point of this discussion. This is not a discussion about Indians and white people or Indians and black people or any color. It's about the human species, and that was the point that I was making. This is about the human species. The human species is one family. We're one family no matter what color you are, because we can change blood. You go to a hospital, you're going to get blood from somebody, and it won't be, could be anybody in the world, matter of fact, because we have the same blood. So what does that say? It says you're the same family. So we're a human family. And we're out of balance. We're way, way out of balance. 2012, 62 years later, and there's 7 billion people in the world. Does that tell you something? Folks, tell you something? 7 billion people, and compounding. It's not just growing, compounding. It's nature. We're nature. Think you're going to stop that? Lots of luck. So what do? What do we do? Well, we have to go back to people who know. We have to get some direction here. We have to modify behavior. We have to modify human behavior. We're going to modify the behavior of the buffaloes. They've already been whacked once. They came back, or they're still there. You can't modify the behavior of salmon. No, they're going to do what they're going to do or not do according to what you do. we're closely, as Chief Paulus said, we're the part of the earth. And if we don't act that way and we don't understand that, then we're going to get modified. And we're pretty much on our way to being modified right now. This is like the 11th inning in a 12-round championship fight. That's where we are right now. '11th round. It's all in question. We're going to lose. That's where we are.
On behalf of the Shuswap Nation Tribal Council and our chiefs, we would like to extend our gratitude and appreciation to the speakers who traveled to our territory and shared their immense knowledge with us on this most important of topics. We thank you sincerely.
One.